the 17th century is not the best time in Europe. Religious wars, famines, and epidemics. It's bad for everyone, but it's doubly bad for Jews. They are strangers, which means they are guilty of everything. The harvest failed. The Jews conjured up through Kabbalah to lime the good Christians. The river became shallow, and again there were Jews. They drink a lot of water. The ghetto is Jewish. It's right next to the shore, just 3 blocks away. And if an epidemic happens, then, and okay, if they just start to put pressure on taxes, you can pay off. Money is a lucrative business, but they can also expel you, depriving you of everything overnight. Or worse, immediately to the stake for refusing baptism, whether the hedgehog survived the pogrom. But not everything is as gloomy as it seems. There is America, in whose colonies, in search of a better life, many people have already moved, and also Australia. A distant southern land at the edge of the world, completely undeveloped, but quite habitable, and, importantly, not yet under the rule of any European monarch. So why not? If other nations can establish colonies across the sea, why are Jews worse? Yes, of course, Australia is much further than America, but there is a plus in this. You can live and breathe freely, and also save up strength to return to the promised land someday, But this is a matter for the future, and for now 4 galleons have gone into the ocean, and if everything goes well, then in a year. But the year has passed, followed by the 2nd, the 3rd, and nothing. No one. So they died. That's what everyone decided, and this time they were wrong. It's just that not far from the Cape of Good Hope, where the waves of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans meet, something went wrong, and a strange green fog enveloped the ships in the wake, and the sun suddenly jumped in the sky and reversed its movement, and in the east, or rather, where the east had just been. A huge moon, unlike the moon, appeared from behind the clouds, the light of which is as bright at night as during the day. What's it? It doesn't look like hell. It doesn't look like heaven either. In any case, neither devils nor angels are visible. But on the other hand, along the banks of a wide river, which the ocean suddenly turned into, meadows are green with emerald grass, and strange birds flutter among huge, previously unseen trees. So where were those who dared to cross 2 oceans for freedom and a new life? In 1543, the Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus, in his immortal work On the Rotation of the Celestial Spheres, removed the Earth from the center of the universe, proving that it was only one of the planets orbiting the Sun in the sphere of fixed stars. And a little more than half a century later, Giordano Bruno, burned by the good Catholics, developing the Copernican doctrine in his philosophy, argued that the Sun was by no means the center of the world, but just an ordinary star out of many stars around which planets similar to Earth also revolve. Bruno was burned, but to burn does not mean to refute. He was replaced by Galileo, who opened the lunar mountains and the moons of Jupiter with his telescope, thereby definitively proving that the Earth, as a planet, is not unique. So the answer is obvious. This is not Earth, but another planet, but very similar to Earth, or even not a planet, but a satellite, the Moon, since it orbits a planet similar to Jupiter, and maybe Jupiter. Galileo would have come here. He would have figured it out. But one thing is clearly clear. There will be no turning back, because this does not happen just like that. And since the local land is abundant and fertile, is it worth being dissatisfied with fate, going against the will of God, becoming like the prophet Jonah? Otherwise, this time, the whale's belly may not be limited. Fate will knock on the door one day, and you will go after her.
Mr. Van Weyden, may I come to you? A knock on the door tore Abraham Van Weyden, the navigator of the Dutch East India Company, who had just returned from another voyage, from a state of blissful doing nothing. And although the cabin of the navigator, in fact the second person on the ship, is not much inferior to the captain's cabin, it cannot even remotely compare with the comfort of a room, not the most expensive portside tavern, where you can just sit in silence and solitude at the open window, looking at the forest of masts above the port, resting body and soul from the vicissitudes of the next voyage, making plans for the future or analyzing the life path over the past 3.5 decades. And now this. In all respects, a pleasant pastime has been unceremoniously disrupted. Who's that? Abraham Van Weyden grimaced in displeasure. Who did the Sea Devil bring there on Sunday afternoon when all decent people, however, perhaps something really important is possible since they showed up at such an untimely hour? Well, we'll find out now. And he said, "Come in, it's not locked." The door swung open and a man appeared on the threshold, whom Abraham Van Weyden least expected to see here and now. A man in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, expensive, latest fashion clothes, a thick, short-cropped beard, a southern, somewhat Spanish-like type of face, the confident, tenacious gaze of the penetrating blue eyes. Clearly not a messenger from an East India company or another trading company with a proposal to conclude another contract, or a neighbor on the floor who decided to drop by the seasoned sea wolf to listen to amazing sea stories. Most likely a merchant, and judging by his clothes, a foreign one, from the south of Europe, from Spain, Portugal, or their overseas colonies. Perhaps the ship owner or the captain of a merchant ship. But whatever it was, the man is clearly with serious intentions. Abraham Van Weyden's half-asleep state was instantly gone. He rose to meet his guest. Abraham Van Weyden, with whom do I have the honor? Isaac Stern, a merchant from Hamburg. The newcomer introduced himself. And then, without a pause, he continued, "Mr. Van Weyden, I apologize for the possible interrupted rest, but I have a business proposal for you that may be of interest to you." A Jewish merchant from the free city of Hamburg, suddenly. Abraham Van Weyden once again appraised the guest. "And what will he offer? I haven't had to work for Jews yet." "Herr Van Weyden," Isaac Stern began after a short pause, sitting comfortably in an armchair near a table littered with papers. "I want to offer you a navigator's contract, under the terms of which you will need to take ships to the shores of Australia, discovered in 1606 by Abel Tasman. You, Ger Van Weyden, are one of the few navigators in Europe with experience of sailing not only in the Atlantic but also in the Indian Ocean, since as a navigator of the Dutch East India Company they repeatedly went to Indonesia, to the colony of Batavia. You are in very good standing with the East India Company, and it's not that far from the colony of Batavia to Australia, so I think you'll be able to make the trip to Australia. Moreover, Mr. Van Weyden, I have managed to collect quite significant material about the expedition of Abel Tasman, including navigation records. They will be at your disposal, and this should make the task much easier." "Thank you for such a flattering assessment of my abilities, Mr. Stern." Abraham Van Weyden switched to German, wanting to show respect to the guest and practice the language once again. "And without false modesty, I can say right away that I am able to fulfill the terms of the contract, but do not consider it excessive curiosity and a desire to pry into other people's business. Why do you need to go to Australia?" "I have been to Batavia twice, and from my own experience I can say that it is far from paradise. And our Dutch East India Company is only kept in those places by the fact that India and China are not so far away. And I think you know as well as I do how much goods from the East cost in Europe. But in Australia, unlike India and China, there is no porcelain, no silk, no spices, none of this. Only savages. In any case, this is exactly what follows from the materials of the Abel Tasman expedition, with which I am also familiar, and I see no reason not to trust them. Or do you, Mr. Stern, have purely scientific goals? Explore a new unknown land. If so, I will gladly agree to participate in such an expedition, because it is also interesting to me. In the evenings, I put my travel notes in order." Abraham Van Weyden nodded at the papers on the table. "Yes, you're right, Herr Van Weyden." Isaac Stern also switched to German. "The plan has no commercial benefits, at least at the first stage. Scientific research will be carried out at the earliest opportunity, but the main goal is to establish a permanent colony in Australia in any place convenient for life." "Colonies?" Abraham Van Weyden was genuinely surprised. "But why, Mr. Stern? Australia is 6 months away, America is 2 months away, and it is still far from populated. So who, and most importantly, why would go to such a distance if possible?" You can, but not for everyone. Isaac Stern's voice rang with steel. We Jews are not allowed. We are Jews, Herr van Weyden. Many years ago, having lost our homeland, we scattered around the world, but we never became welcome anywhere. And if they were somewhere, it wasn't for long, while they were needed. One Alhambra edict of 1492 is worth a lot. Of course, the best thing would be to return the promised land once given by God to our people and recreate Israel. But in the current state of affairs, the balance of forces is such that it is not possible to do this with all the desire. We cannot defeat the Ottoman Turks. But there is another, simpler, but also a longer way, to establish an independent colony of Israel, where Jews could live freely, as in their own country, without fear of persecution just because they are Jews. And Australia, Geer van Weyden, is much more suitable for this than America, precisely because it is further away. After all, America, unlike Australia, has long been divided by the kings of Europe, even if in many ways formally. And as soon as it becomes known, and it will not be possible to hide it for a long time, that the Jews want to create in America not just another settlement, but an independent colony, a second Israel. The monarchs of Europe will do everything to ensure that the colony ceases to exist, and most likely together with the colonists. It will be much more difficult to do this with a colony in Australia. It is precisely because of the distance and, as a result, the huge cost of sending troops. So there is a great chance that the existence of an independent Jewish colony located so far away, and we will not immediately declare independence in order to gain maximum time to prepare for protection. In Europe, they will simply close their eyes, as an unpleasant but quite tolerable fact. Well, in the future, if it is possible to overcome the first difficulties and achieve, if not recognition, but at least the political neutrality of Europe, it will be possible to colonize the whole of Australia and begin to accumulate forces in order, maybe in 50, maybe in 100, or even 200 years to liberate Palestine and recreate Israel, leaving behind Australia has the status of an overseas territory. And Herr van Weyden, Isaac Stern lowered his voice. We, myself and those who share my views, have thought for a long time and have come to the conclusion that not only Jews, Jews by faith, but also Jews by blood, descendants of those Jews who, for one reason or another, changed their faith, provided they return to the faith of their ancestors, can become colonists. Children should not be responsible for their parents' affairs, and it would be foolish to alienate so many people who can be useful in our common cause, especially when you consider that by adopting a different faith, a Jew, and I mentioned the Alhambra Edict for good reason, could be not entirely sincere and pass this insincerity by inheritance. The last words were said quietly, almost in a whisper, but they made Abraham van Weyden, the navigator of the Dutch East India Company, a real sea wolf, who had been in fierce tropical hurricanes more than once and was used to honestly and directly looking death in the face, turn cold inside. This Stern, does he know? But from where? After all, he always did everything alone without witnesses. Or he doesn't know, but just guesses, assuming such a possibility itself, since he made inquiries about him. After all, it is no secret here in Rotterdam that Abraham van Weyden is not a pure-blooded Dutchman, but a half-breed. His father is Dutch, and his mother is Spanish. But also that his mother is not just Spanish, but from Spanish Marans, that is, baptized Jews. Some of the living may also know. Not everyone was taken away by the plague overnight, as parents. And gold, as you know, can loosen tongues better than the strongest Jamaican rum. But even this is not so scary with his current status. You never know who and when someone had in their ancestors. Jesus was also a Jew. But if it becomes known that the good Christian Abraham van Weyden is a secret Jew, it's a bonfire. Do not repent. They do not forgive such things. These are not the books of Copernicus, Galileo, and Giordano Bruno to read. Meanwhile, Isaac Stern, a merchant from the free city of Hamburg, as if not noticing the condition of the interlocutor, continued in a normal voice. So, as you can see, Herr van Weyden, everything planned is quite logical and feasible, although, of course, not without difficulties. And now that you know everything, I would like to hear your decision. The amount of payment under the contract will be equal to the amount of payment for your previous voyage to Batavia. But I warn you right away, in case of refusal, there will be no claims against you. I'll just leave as if nothing had happened. I only need volunteers. You cannot build a new country under duress. Then consider me with you, Mr. Stern. Abraham van Weyden smiled. I am ready to sign the contract right now. We will sign the contract in Hamburg upon arrival. It is more convenient this way. I am glad, Herr van Weyden, that you are with us. Isaac Stern smiled too. And now, Mr. Stern, Abraham Van Weyden decided to move on to the practical side of the matter. I would like to know about the general state of affairs. They are at the completion stage, Herr Van Weyden. 4 new large tonnage 1,000 ton of the same type cargo galleons. Abraham, Moses, David, Solomon, converted for passenger transportation. The team consists of 25 people, 5 officers, 20 sailors, all with experience. At least 3 voyages to the Caribbean, Central, South, or North America. Recruited from Jews, either Isaac Stern Post, like you, Geir Van Weyden. In addition to the 25-man ship's crew, each ship will have 10 Marines to protect and maintain order. They were recruited on the same terms as the members of the ship's crew by me personally, or by my proxies. The 3 ships have their own navigators with experience of sailing in the Atlantic. You, Herr Van Weyden, are appointed senior navigator on the flagship Abraham. I am in charge of the entire expedition, and upon arrival I will become the head of the colony. Colony's passengers with their families. There are 400 people in total, 100 people per ship. Of course, it would be possible to take more, but given the presence of children and women, as well as the duration of the voyage, I would not like to bring living corpses to Australia. They still have to settle in a new place. Upon arrival, if everything goes well after the settlement of the colony, 3 ships will leave for Europe for a new batch of colonists. 1 will remain in case of an emergency evacuation of the colony. Transit route, Hamburg, Azores for resupply. They belong to Portugal, whose heyday has long passed, and there is less chance of encountering some official Hidalgo, as in the Canary Islands, who imagines himself almost a viceroy. Next, Kapstadt is at the southern tip of Africa, where supplies are replenished again and the transition to Australia. Reasonable in all respects, Mr. Stern. But I have a question. Is it supposed to go from Hamburg to the Azores via the English Channel along the coast of Europe? Yes, Herr Van Weyden, but what is bothering you? The shortest and most traveled way. Pirates. Geir Stern, in the royal service. Relations between England and France have recently escalated again, but no one wants to start an open war yet. Each side prefers to poison the other's life with someone else's hands. And as a result, instead of working together to restore order in coastal waters, the English Navy catches and hangs French pirates. The French Navy catches and hangs English pirates. But neither side touches its pirates. Our Dutch fleet prefers to remain inactive, since neither the British nor the French are touching ships under the Dutch flag, at least not yet, preferring to hunt the Spaniards in the Caribbean, but for 4 cargo galleons under the flag of the free city of Hamburg that the British and the French can covet. So it is better and safer to go through the North Sea, bypassing the British Isles to the Atlantic. Of course, it will turn out to be a big detour, but that's what we'll do, Herr Van Weyden, Isaac Stern summed up. We don't need to take unnecessary risks. We don't need to meet with pirates. We have the wrong situation. When is the departure planned? In a month. I have to finish my business. I've already finished mine in Rotterdam. My schooner is in port. How many days do you need, Herr Van Weyden, to finish your business? Not at all. 15 minutes to pack, Mr. Stern. Abraham Van Weyden got up from the table. And I'm at your complete disposal. And a quarter of an hour later, 2 men came out of the tavern door. Isaac Stern, a merchant from the free city of Hamburg, and Abraham Van Weyden, hired by him, now a former navigator of the Dutch East India Company, and slowly headed towards the port, towards their fate. Chapter 2. Sea and Land Affairs. Sailing is the most important and exciting moment of the beginning of any voyage, when it still seems to be on land. But the deck is already swaying steadily under your feet, although standing at the pier, but the ship is ready to go to sea. And a completely different sea life is about to begin, with all its laws and rules. One for everyone, whether you're a cabin boy going on your first voyage, a seasoned sailor soaked in sea salt, a gray-haired captain, or a passenger. Yes, the passenger, or rather the passengers. Standing on the quarterdeck of the flagship Abraham Van Weyden watched as boats scurrying back and forth brought future residents of the colony of Israel aboard anchored galleons. The loading of everything necessary was completed a day ago, and in order not to take up space at the pier, the ships were taken deep into the water area of the port. "They'll get there in the boats," Isaac Stern stated in a peremptory tone to the question of the captains. "At what time tomorrow should we approach the pier to receive passengers?" "Let them get used to a new life for themselves. There will be more to come." Yes, there really will be a lot more ahead. In this regard, Abraham van Weyden, having rich maritime experience, had no doubt at all, as well as that both the crew and the passengers would withstand anything and everything. Fortunately, there was something to compare it with, or rather, with whom. For in his youth, while still a simple sailor, he repeatedly crossed the Atlantic on ships carrying emigrants to overseas colonies. And someone looked longingly at the receding shore. Someone began to tremble at the sight of the endless expanse of water. Someone eagerly peered ahead along the course of the ship going across the ocean. In general, to each his own, each about his own. But here, everything is different. A single soldered monolith. People united by one common idea. The idea of creating your own new free country on the far shores, at the very edge of the world. And the steady gleam in his eyes is the best confirmation of this. And the general preparation of the expedition did not leave much to be desired. From magnificent galleons with cabins on the lower deck, both for passengers and crew members, including ordinary sailors, which in itself is unheard of, but quite justified in this case luxury, and to cargo, which in addition to a supply of water, food, tools, household items and weapons, also includes a supply of lemon juice as a remedy for scurvy, which is the scourge of sailors on long ocean voyages. But most of all, Abraham van Weyden was struck by the presence of a marine chronometer among the navigation instruments. In other words, a watch capable of walking with high accuracy on board a ship, which in itself was a kind of miracle, since even making a land chronometer is not an easy task, although it is quite possible for an experienced watchmaker who is able to carefully adjust and debug the entire mechanism, as well as adjust the stabilizer, the pendulum. And Abraham van Weyden, as an educated man and interested in various technical innovations, was well aware of this. But this is on land, when the whole mechanism is firmly on the ground. And in the sea, at sea, a ship rocks on the waves. And even if it is possible to manage to make a mechanism insensitive to pitching, it is still a pendulum. It is. And I found a replacement. I've been working on a marine chronometer for half my life, said the watchmaker, not without pride, a wizened old man with a talking surname Goldfinger, who, as the creator of the marine chronometer, was introduced to Abraham van Weyden and 3 other navigators by Isaac Stern. If they proved themselves well during the transition, and there were 4 chronometers in total, 1 per ship, then such a product will become our colonial monopoly. They will prove it, don't hesitate. Goldfinger nodded. My grandchildren have been shaking them for a month at the trials, and nothing. They go as one, neither forward nor backward, so I can vouch for the accuracy. A barometer recently created by the Italian Torricelli to predict weather changes based on changes in atmospheric pressure, as well as several large telescopes of unusual design, with concave mirrors instead of a lens, giving a much higher quality, not blurred and not colored, with a colored border around the edges. The image on this background did not make a special impression on anyone, although they were outstanding achievements in their field. The main thing is the chronometer. After all, if he really can work with the necessary accuracy in the open sea, then the method of determining longitude will be simplified many times. I compared the difference in the readings of the time of the culmination of the sun with the time at the 0 meridian that passes through English Greenwich, and here it is the longitude. There is no need to suffer with any star tables. In general, as Abraham van Weyden understood, using fairly well-established ties between Jewish communities in different European countries, Isaac Stern, when he himself went through his attorneys, was able to collect many of the most advanced innovations from various fields of science and technology, thereby turning his large house, standing almost in the center of the Jewish quarter, into a real treasure trove of amazing things and knowledge, which was sometimes not suspected not only by the respectable inhabitants of the free city of Hamburg, who profess Christianity, but also by its Jewish neighbors. The conspiracy was doing its job, although by and large no one was overly secretive. And what, strictly speaking, is going on in particular? Well, a rich Jewish merchant set out to carry his co-religionists across the sea, so let him carry them. Who is worse off from this? To nobody. And the fact that part of his team is not from Jews, but from Christians is also not a big deal. Is it forbidden for Christians to work for a Jew? No, of course not, especially with them in the free city. Money, as you know, does not smell, unless of course you especially sniff, so. The empty boat, which had brought the last batch of passengers, rolled away from the side. "We're sailing!" Isaac Stern nodded to Captain Olaf Larsen, an old acquaintance of Abraham van Weyden, a burly, red-bearded Norwegian who looked somewhat like a medieval Viking. And after all, who would have thought that he was too? The creak of the capstan, the anchors are up, and the galleons, caught up by the current, lined up in the wake, begin to slowly descend to the mouth of the Elbe, to the exit to the North Sea. The sailors are briskly climbing the shrouds, setting sails. The passengers, lined up at the sides, trying not to interfere with the work of the sailing team, wave to the mourners. It is a painfully familiar picture, seen many times by Abraham van Weyden. But this time it is mixed with some strange, completely new, unfamiliar feeling that something in the surrounding world has subtly changed. Yes, it has changed for him personally, irrevocably, and forever. And then comes the realization that this feeling is freedom. Freedom from the fear of exposure, freedom from the need to pretend, freedom to be himself there, in the distance, beyond the blue expanse of the ocean, in a new country, off the distant shores, where this beautiful sailing ship is now carrying him along with people like him, thirsting for freedom. The mouth of the river widens, turning into a sea expanse, and catching the light morning breeze with their sails, the ships, leaving a foamy trail behind them, go further and further to the horizon. The shores of Europe are hidden in the distance. Chapter 3. The Sea Hare. Thanks to a fair wind and good weather, within 2 days it was possible to cross the entire North Sea without any adventures, and circumnavigating the Orkney Islands, enter the Atlantic Ocean. The watch changed watches, the crews of the ships gradually got involved in the work, and the passengers, gradually getting used to the pitching and getting rid of seasickness, got used to the new role of contemplators of a vast expanse of water, now without any signs of land for many months of crossing to the Azores Islands. And it would seem that it is unlikely that anything can significantly disrupt the established order. But human life, as you know, is full of surprises, and therefore on the third day of the voyage, an extra passenger was accidentally discovered on board the Abraham. And it happened like this. Shortly after noon, a sailor appeared in Isaac Stern's cabin, just at the moment when Abraham van Weyden was finishing a report on the results of navigational observations, and with a somewhat confused look reported that an unknown man had been found. I was hiding in the hold among the cargo, Herr Stern. They found it by accident. But he doesn't look like a fugitive. I have no weapons with me, only a chest with things. And the old one, about 50 years old, looks like a pharmacist or a doctor. It's too smart to look at. The Marines are guarding him now. The captain sent for you. For a few moments, there was complete silence in the cabin, broken only by the lapping of the waves overboard and the whistling of the wind in the rigging. After which Isaac Stern, uttering something like the roar of a lion, left the cabin with the most resolute air. Abraham van Weyden followed him, perfectly understanding the condition of the head of the expedition. Actually, there was nothing out of the ordinary about what happened. Similar cases, although infrequent, have happened. When, driven to despair by poverty and lack of light, a person unable to pay for moving to the colonies, in the hope of a better and happier life, secretly made his way aboard the ship and found himself only at a considerable distance from the shore, knowing full well that for the sake of one person no one would come back, as well as throw away overboard the self-appointed passenger. Well, at most they will pull out a line for such a thing, and even then it is unlikely. It's no use, it won't make any more money. Most likely they will sign up for the team for the simplest jobs, scrubbing the deck so that they don't waste bread and at least pay for the move. But this is on ordinary ships going to the American colonies. Their case is different, and it is still unknown what this seemingly intelligent pharmacist or doctor could find out and hear in 2 days in the hold, and therefore even to the point of being locked up until they arrive in Australia. But in any case, back to Europe, at least before the official proclamation of the independent colony of Israel, his path is blocked. The deck was full of people, and near the mainmast, under the protection of 2 Marines, there was a man, indeed, aged about 50, of short stature, although rather strong build, balding, in cheap, very shabby clothes, resembling in appearance, but not a pharmacist or a doctor. In this respect, Abraham van Weyden did not quite agree with the sailor. Most of all, the self-appointed passenger looked like a university professor. In any case, at the University of Padua, which Abraham van Weyden was lucky enough to visit, the professors looked exactly like this. If, of course, you put a professor's robe on the unknown instead of his rags. I, Isaac Stern, am a ship owner. Isaac Stern gave the self-appointed passenger an unkind look. Miguel de Torres is a physicist, astronomer, and mathematician. I'm sorry, Mr. Stern, that I had to sneak aboard your ship, but I had very good reasons for that. I am quite solvent, and I can pay for the move. De Torres slapped his side, which made a slight metallic clink. He's wearing a coin belt, the Marine commander explained. Claims to be gold, but we haven't checked. Gold, De Torres nodded. So at least double the fee for the move. I don't need a cabin. I can be satisfied with a place in the hold, and I won't be a burden to anyone. Moreover, the last phrase was pronounced in Hebrew, and during the next hour, everyone gathered on deck had the opportunity to hear the amazing life story of Miguel de Torres, who came from a family of wealthy Spanish Maran Jews who devoted himself to science. Familiar with many prominent scientists in Europe who listened to the lectures of Galileo Galilei himself, and now has to flee overseas under threat of persecution from the Inquisition for defending the Copernican system of the world. They've been grinding their teeth at me for a long time, Miguel de Torres sighed. I thought that if I moved to Hamburg, it would be quieter. Still, a free city where the Inquisition is not particularly in favor. But a few days ago, I noticed that I was being followed and realized that either a bag on my head and a bonfire wherever in Rome or Seville, where I come from, or I need to move overseas. But it was impossible to sail in the open. They would have found me in the colonies. But at the port, I found out that 4 ships, the ship owner of which is a Jew, are transporting Jews to the colonies, and I thought that this was the best thing for me. They won't give their own away. At night, just before sailing, I swam to the Abraham. I had nothing, just a chest, climbed the anchor rope and into the hold. I sat there for 2 days. I was already thinking of going out myself, and then they found me. Yes, you are right, Senor de Torres. They don't give away their own. Isaac Stern smiled. But answer me directly, did the Inquisition persecute you only for science or even for secret Judaism? And seeing how pale de Torres turned, he continued. Don't worry, Senor de Torres, there are no Christians here among us, and on the other 3 ships at all, either Jews or formerly Christians, but in fact secret Jews. Yes, me too, but... Do you want to know why we don't hide it? Isaac Stern smiled again. Because we are not going to America. Our goal is Australia, where an independent colony of Israel will be created, in which Jews will be able to live freely, professing the faith of their ancestors, not pretending to be Christians, and not being afraid of anyone. And all you see here is the first batch of colonists. And America is just for show. You know, in such a case you have to hide a lot. So you were in the right place at the right time, Senor de Torres. Welcome to the ranks of the colonists. We need smart and educated people, but forget about paying and moving in the hold. We have enough space. Give me some water, de Torres finally asked, who was in a semi-fainting state. Inside or on your head? Rebbe Michael Finkel, who was not only a rabbi but also a doctor, asked, thereby wishing to bring a newly arrived resident of the colony of Israel to himself through a joke. If you can, Miguel de Torres literally choked on a laugh, and so did everyone else. That's how the acquaintance ended. In the absence of available living quarters, Miguel de Torres was accommodated in the mess, where his simple luggage, consisting of a chest with books and writing materials, was transferred. And in the evening, Miguel de Torres, who had already moved with everyone on board by that time, and having received permission from Isaac Stern, read to everyone, of whom there were many, a lecture on the structure of the world according to the Copernican system, which led Abraham van Weyden to organize training courses for navigators as a reserve for the future. After all, the colony of Israel will grow and develop, and this is impossible without regular communication with Europe, and therefore in the near future they will need experienced navigators capable of plotting the course of the ships of the future Jewish fleet. Chapter 4. On the Edge of a Knife. Almost 4 weeks of the journey to the Azores flew by unnoticed. Only once did a storm hit, indicating that autumn had already come into its own in the northern hemisphere, and a couple of times the sails of oncoming ships flashed on the horizon. That's all the incidents, and despite the fact that no one was particularly bored, the navigation school opened by Abraham van Weyden operated, and Miguel de Torres periodically organized lectures on one or another ship of the small squadron, thereby increasing the general educational level of future colonists. Everyone was looking forward to calling at Ponto Delgada, the main port and capital of the Azores, where you can not only feel solid ground under your foot, but also eat normally, because the daily soup with corned beef and breadcrumbs, even seasoned with vegetables, which, like lemon juice, were given out to prevent scurvy, was already pretty fed up. I wanted something fried, fresh from the spit, with good wine and fragrant white bread. And all this awaits on the shore, in the cozy taverns and taverns of Ponto Delgada. But such bright hopes were not destined to come true, and it was only by a lucky chance that Ponto Delgada did not become the end point of the expedition. But about everything in order. The island of San Miguel, the largest and most populated of the entire Azores group, appeared shortly after noon, floating out from behind the southwestern horizon. But despite the fact that the weather was great, a light breeze and almost no waves, the ocean was deserted, and this immediately alerted Abraham van Weyden. After all, the Azores are the main transshipment point for ships going to South America and the Caribbean islands. And in the old days, ships were crowded here. But there's no one here, and even if we assume that they were just lucky not to meet any ships here and now, then where are the fishermen? There was always enough fishing stuff in these waters, but here everything seemed to have died out. Extremely strange, to say the least. I, Herr Stern, agree with Herr van Weyden in this regard. Captain Olaf Larsson lowered the telescope after another inspection of the horizon. Something's not right here, and even if we assume that the pirates staged a raid on San Miguel, as has happened more than once, then this does not concern the fishermen. The pirates do not touch them. Moreover, we are at the western tip of the island, and it is not close to Ponte Delgada from here, and there are no more tidbits here for pirates. "There's a sail on the starboard side!" the lookout shouted from the foretop. "Where is he?" Abraham van Weyden fumbled with his telescope. "Oh, here it is!" Two ships appeared in the field of view of the telescope, steeply to the wind, under full sail. The frigate sloop. Moreover, as it followed from the flags, the frigate was French, but the sloop was English, which was extremely strange, in the sense that the political situation in Europe a month ago did not in any way favor joint actions by ships of the two countries. And here is such a strange defiling in all respects, instead of grabbing each other by the throat, but it seems with the clear intention of running away from something. In any case, from the results of observations of the actions of both ships, Abraham van Weyden got exactly this impression. But in this case, a completely natural question arose. What could scare both the British and the French so much that they were trying to escape, jointly forgetting about any political contradictions of their countries? If they are pirates, then with what forces should they attack Ponte Delgada in order to put two warships to flight? And if a one-on-one battle with pirates can pose a real danger for a sloop, then a frigate. If frigate is easily able to disassemble all pirate brigantines and schooners with its artillery for firewood. Herr Stern, will you order the guns to be loaded? Captain Olaf Larsson finally broke the long silence. No, you don't have to. We'll just raise a panic. Isaac Stern, without looking up from his telescope, watched the approaching ships. It's obviously not because of the pirates. There is no visible combat damage on either the frigate or the sloop, and it would not have been possible without them. Neither the British nor the French have ever been cowards, just to run away as soon as they saw the enemy. It's something else, but what? The question remained unanswered, but not for long. Taking even more steeply to the wind, the benefit of the oblique sailing armament allowed it. The sloop, approaching the Abraham, lay on a countercourse, and the sailor standing on the quarterdeck earned flags, and everything became clear. Moreover, it was so clear and unambiguous that Abraham van Weyden, who was familiar with the flag alphabet, literally moved his hat on his head, because the hair stood on end under it, because from the message transmitted by the English sailor, it followed. There is a plague in Ponte Delgada. Abraham van Weyden watched the frigate and sloop depart. At least you can fight off the pirates, but the plague, she... All that remained was to follow the example of the British and French. Because after such news, there could be no question of any call at Puente Delgada for rest and replenishment. It was more expensive for oneself. And moreover, at the General Council, it was decided to go straight to Kapstadt, without risking calling instead of the Azores, on the Canary Islands or Cape Verde Islands lying along the way, in case the plague got there. And along the way, explore the island of Tristan da Cunha in more detail for the possibility of creating a transshipment base there for ships going to Australia with future shipments of migrants. Because Kapstadt, for all its attractiveness in the form of a convenient bay and a well-established ship supply system, still belongs to Holland. And God only knows how the government of the United Provinces will react to the fact of the declaration of independence of the colony of Israel. So it is beneficial in all respects to have a transshipment base halfway out of Europe that is not controlled by any of the European powers, up to the declaration of the sovereignty of the colony of Israel over the island of Tristan da Cunha. We will keep this in mind as a possible option for the future. Isaac Stern summed up the council. Ger van Weyden, plot a course to Tristan da Cunha, and on the way, if we meet anyone, we will also warn about the plague in the Azores. We've been almost on a knife's edge today. If the plague catches us in the harbor on the roadstead, the whole thing is over. Perhaps no one would have survived at all. During the rest of the day, 2 more ships were met, a Spanish galleon and a Dutch fleet, warning their crews about the plague in the Azores. And then, it happened just before sunset, when another ship was spotted slightly off course and turned around to warn the crew not to go to the Azores Islands. But as they approached, it became clear that this ship, which turned out to be a medium-sized brig on closer inspection, was behaving strangely. Despite the raised sails, he did not follow the course, but drifted helplessly, prowling here and there under the blows of wind and waves with the complete absence of people on the upper deck and superstructures. The ship is adrift with the sails unfurled. An empty deck. Abraham van Weyden felt a slight tremor start to hit him for the second time that day, from the guess that was emerging in his head. Yes, this brig, it's... Isaac Stern lowered his telescope. The team is dead. God rest their souls. Geir Larsen, get the guns ready. Let's send the infection to Neptune. Will 1 salvo of Abraham be enough? I'm not sure, Mr. Stern. Captain Olaf Larsen looked appraisingly at the ghost brig. The ship is quite large. Then the whole squadron. Let the gunners practice. And a few minutes later, the general broadside of the galleon sent the plague brig on its last voyage to the bottom of the Atlantic, thereby ridding the world of the source of the Black Death that had tormented humanity for many centuries in a row, and gathered with each of its arrival an abundant harvest of human lives. Chapter 5: Entertainment and Adventures on the Island of Tristan da Cunha. If the depths allow, we will land here, Isaac Stern summarized after examining the shore through a telescope. Although the raid is almost open, but according to the barometer, no storm is expected. And most importantly, there is water nearby and there is a lot of some kind of stream, almost a river. So, Mr. Larsen, lower the boats with the lot and let's hope that we will be lucky. The almost 2-month passage from the Azores to Tristan da Cunha Island had finally ended, and now the galleons lay adrift about half a mile from the northern shore of this uninhabited island, lost in the vastness of the South Atlantic, accidentally discovered in 1506 by the Portuguese navigator Tristan da Cunha, and named the island by his own name. They did not dare to approach closer than half a mile in view of complete ignorance about the possible navigational dangers near the shore, since Tristan da Cunha himself, being the discoverer, did not land on the shore, but only determined the coordinates of the island he discovered, marking the place of that on the map, which he limited himself to. Despite all efforts, it was not possible to find any references to later, more detailed studies of the island in preparation for the expedition, which suggested quite a natural assumption that perhaps this island lying away from the sea routes appeared before the eyes for the second time in more than a century and a half since its discovery, the Europeans, now looking at him with lust from the side of all 4 galleons. 3 months at sea is not an easy test even for a seasoned sailor, and what can we say about passengers who left land for the first time and were so cruelly deceived in their hopes for a full-fledged vacation in the Azores? But we had to wait, because there was a very real chance to land on a shoal hidden under the water when approaching the shore, or worse, run into rocks. And therefore, until the return of the boats with the results of depth measurements, not an inch forward to the shore. All that remained was to look at the island from afar with the naked eye or through a telescope. And there was a lot to see. A vast plateau, overgrown with a dense carpet of greenery, towering several hundred feet above the waves of the ocean with rocky, almost vertical shores, smoothly turning into an impressive mountain with a sloping, smoking peak covered with dazzling white glaciers shining in the rays of the rising morning sun. A typical volcanic island, which in ancient times rose from the depths of the ocean and now gives shelter to many seabirds nesting on the cliffs of coastal cliffs and other marine life, such as seals, who chose that part of the coast where the steep cliffs smoothly turned into a beach covered with black volcanic sand, near which boats were now scurrying, conducting soundings the depths. And it seems that we are not the first here in a century and a half, concluded Abraham van Weyden, drawing attention to how the seals basking in the sun were alarmed at the approach of the boats. Through the optics of the telescope, it was perfectly visible that the small herd lying on the shore did not just show concern at the appearance of something previously unknown to them, and as one, they all got up and rushed into the water. That's how it is. Isaac Stern thought for a moment. In this case, when exploring the island, you should pay attention to possible traces of human presence. And one more thing, he said to Marine Commander Aaron Yeager, who was standing next to him. Herr Yeager, set up posts and maximum vigilance at night. Everyone, including the group that will explore the island, should be armed with new-style rifles. It is possible that the pirates have a base or a warehouse of loot here. It's too convenient a place. Of course, they are unlikely to be here right now, but it will not be superfluous to take precautions. Moreover, we are no longer in Europe and there is no point in hiding our new products anymore. One of the novelties. Abraham Van Weyden mentally corrected the head of the expedition. Because the guns they have of a new type or shotguns with a shock igniter are indeed an order of magnitude superior to the flintlock rifles that are becoming more and more widespread in Europe. Firstly, double-barreled, which gives the advantage of a second shot without reloading. And secondly, most importantly, instead of flint, a copper cap with a special substance on the bottom is used to ignite gunpowder, which is put on a brand tube with a special substance on the bottom that ignites when the cap is pulled. A huge step forward compared to a flintlock in which a spark can easily be blown away by the wind. Or worse, the seed powder on the shelf will get wet, then you won't shoot at all. And the flash in front of the eyes of this very seed powder on the shelf is also an unpleasant thing, not to mention the fact that at night it unmasks the shooter. And there is none of this here. Load and shoot, of course, if you know how to make an igniter substance, the composition and method of manufacture of which is a strictly guarded secret designed to give the colonists an advantage in the event of a very likely war for the independence of the colony of Israel, as well as branch shells for cannons. A considerable number of them are stored in the pit chambers of all 4 galleons and are capable of turning any ship in their affected area into a bonfire. Moreover, Abraham Van Weyden had the opportunity to observe the effect of these brand shells during the transition from Rotterdam to Hamburg, when a pirate sloop tried to attack their schooner near the entrance to the English Channel, considering a small 2-masted vessel armed with only a few swivel guns, a relatively easy prey. And what was the surprise of the pirates already ready to board, when the schooner under the flag of the free city of Hamburg, instead of trying to escape or drift and surrender to the mercy of the winner, suddenly fired a broadside from a long range, but not with ordinary cast iron balls on the hull or buckshot on the deck, as it always happened, and something strange and incomprehensible, spewing out of the barrels of their seemingly harmless swivel guns a moment ago, fireballs of dazzling white flame shining brighter than the sun. Moreover, the fire was conducted with exceptional accuracy, since 2 of these 3 truly diabolical shells directly hit the hull of the sloop. The third, having passed with a flight, or maybe it was intended that way, before plunging into the water, set fire to the sails, opening over the heads of gentlemen, monsieur, and maybe the lords of luck. The pirates did not bother to raise the flag. A real fiery hell. However, in terms of the intensity of the burning, many times inferior to the hell that opened up on the deck of the pirate ship, because the 2 remaining fire projectiles crashing into the sides almost instantly set fire to the tarred wood of the hull and deck flooring, emitting such unbearable heat that it was absolutely impossible to extinguish them, no matter how much water was poured. Gorenge. And as a natural result, there was panic among the team and an explosion of gunpowder in the hook chamber. That's it, gentlemen. There were pirates and there weren't. Isaac Stern summed up the fleeting battle, looking through a telescope at the smoldering wreckage on the water. And there is no one to save. No one survived. Maybe it's for the best. The executioner has less work to do, and we don't need witnesses. The course is the same. Hamburg. And we are not here and never have been. What kind of shells are these, Herr Stern? Greek fire. Abraham Van Weyden, who was in a state of deep shock from what he saw, could only squeeze out a question. Rather Indian, although perhaps the ancient Greeks also used something similar. But I bought this recipe from an Indian. It was expensive, though I had to pay. Isaac Stern paused, taking another look at the pile of wreckage that had recently been a pirate ship far astern. But as you can see, it justifies itself. And you can't put it out with water. It burns so that the iron melts. So, if the pirates had something more serious today, a brigantine, a brig, a frigate, or even a battleship, the result would be the same. We, Herr Van Weyden, in the event of a war of independence, will be like David and Goliath, In a fight with swords or spears, David had no chance against Goliath, and he, knowing this very well, used a sling. So these brand projectiles are also, in a way, our David's sling, and not the only one. But more on that later. Herr van Weyden, but for now without too much publicity, you know. Uncle Abraham, will there be an eruption? And that's how the volcano smokes. The question of 12-year-old Mordecai, or Mordi, because of his young age, distracted Abraham van Weyden from the memories of events 4 months ago. I don't know, son, but I hope not. It's only in the stories of Senor de Torres that the eruption looks beautiful, but in fact it's not good. One ash is worth a lot. We once got caught with our captain Geir Larsen under an ashfall near Iceland. The ship had to be rebuilt for half a day. Yes, a son, or rather a stepson, because a little more than a month ago, on the day when they crossed the equator, moving from daytime to midnight countries, on board the flagship galleon Abraham, according to the Jewish rites, according to the law of Moses, the wedding of the senior navigator of the expedition, Abraham van Weyden, and the youngest daughter of the creator of the marine chronometer took place watchmaker Goldfinger Sarah, only shortly before sailing. Thanks to a happy coincidence, the Amazon jungle knows how to keep its secrets, having got rid of the status of a straw widow in which she spent more than 10 years. Their first acquaintance took place back in Hamburg, and then, living in the confined space of a ship brings people together willy-nilly. Moreover, a woman cartographer, because thanks to her natural talent for drawing, Sarah copied maps perfectly. So what more could you want? And as a natural result, now Abraham van Weyden's cabin has become a little more crowded, but much more fun. Finally, the boats, having completed depth measurements, returned with good news. There are no shoals and reefs. The bottom is sandy. The depths allow you to anchor within a couple of cables from the shore. Great! Isaac Stern turned to the captain with a satisfied smile. Geir Larsen, send a message to the squadron. We go to the shore and anchor. And here it is. It has happened. After 3 months of the ocean, when there is water and water all around, and the whole habitable world is just a ship, and your feet feel the wooden deck swinging to the beat of the waves day after day, the keels of the boats grate on the coastal sand, and people jump ashore. Earth, finally, the earth. And let this land, this coast, be uninhabited and wild, and there are no hospitable taverns where you can spend your time enjoying the coziness and comfort after a long sea voyage. This is Earth! Earth! But the euphoria of landing did not last long. Isaac Stern has loaded everyone with work. The passengers set about setting up the camp, and the team replenished fresh water supplies from the waterfall forming spring flowing from a crevice in the coastal rocks. Some of the boats, taking a fishing net, went to sea again, promising, in case of a good catch, a fish day, since the daily corned beef with breadcrumbs had long been standing across the throat. Thus everyone was in business one way or another, with the exception of the children, who frolicked, ran along the shore, spending the energy accumulated during the forced sitting on the ships. It was they who made the discovery, which brought considerable benefit to the expedition in the future. Although, to be precise, the discovery was made by Mordi, who, being the owner of a telescope given to him by Abraham van Weyden, together with his friends climbed the beach overlooking the beach to better look around the neighborhood. "The ship! The wrecked ship!" The cry of children running to the camp alarmed everyone, forcing them to quit their jobs. Where have you seen it?" Questions poured in from all sides. There on the shore, there in that direction." So quietly, someone says one. Isaac Stern tried to restore order. "Who saw the wrecked ship, and where?" "I saw it, Herr Stern, through the telescope," Mordi said proudly, in the silence that finally came. "You can see from there." He pointed to the elevation of the coastal slope. "We saw everything. And me, and Essia, and Fira, and Solomon. I let them look through the tube. But I saw the first one. The brigantine lies on the shore between the rocks. The direction is 30 degrees northeast. The foresail is partially broken. The mainsail yards are only under slanting sails. So the brigantine, not the brig. The brig also has straight sails on the mainmast." "Well done, Mordi! You're making progress! It's not for nothing that I took you to the navigation school." Abraham van Weyden mentally praised his stepson. "And then your mother said that at the age of 12 you are still learning seamanship early. It's not too early, it's just right." "Mordi, did you see any people nearby?" Isaac Stern asked another question, who at the moment was least interested in Van Weyden Jr.'s knowledge of navigation and the type of sailing ships. "No one. Not on deck, not near Mr. Stern. And there are no boats. The older Solomon, who has already turned 15, also a midshipman at the navigation school, intervened in the conversation. They could have tried to escape in a dinghy when they saw that the ship was heading straight for the rocks and did not rake out. And then the brigantine was thrown ashore empty. Maybe so, Isaac Stern agreed with Solomon. But we will not guess. We will check on the spot. A decent crowd went to check on the spot, except for the head of the expedition and those directly involved in this discovery. Isaac Stern winced slightly, but said nothing. After all, the work on setting up the camp can wait, and people are just curious. From the high coastal slope there was a magnificent view of the ocean and a large part of the island, not hidden by the cone of the volcano, the steep shore of which, from the east side, as Mordi correctly determined, about 30 degrees to the northeast, was cut by a narrow, gently descending gorge to the sea, at the mouth of which the beached brigantine lay. Successfully, it fits in between two rather impressive coastal cliffs. It's been lying here for a long time. The sand is under the keel, Isaac Stern summarized, examining the shipwreck site through a telescope. And it looks like Solomon is right. The crew on the boats tried to save, but unsuccessfully. Otherwise, if anyone had survived, it would have been dismantled for a tree for a hut. And not far, no more than a mile. Let's see what's in the holds. There was a cargo in the hold, the importance of which for the future colony was difficult to overestimate. No, it was not gold in bullion or silver in coins, the true value of which is fully revealed only in long-lived civilized countries. There was silk in the hold. Magnificent, high-quality multicolored silk from China, as well as porcelain. Here we can all be dressed in silk more than once, Isaac Stern stated, after counting the number of bales of silk. The dishes are really smaller and partially broken, but at least one set per family. I propose to divide the entire cargo of silk and dishes equally, and the gold and silver found into a common pot. No one objected to such a fair division of the wealth that had inadvertently fallen on his head. Moreover, there were relatively few gold and silver coins forgotten in a hurry by the crew members when leaving the distressed brigantine. Silk fabric and tableware are 100 times more valuable in this regard, considering where they are now heading. And besides, no one in the old or new world could even formally claim the cargo of the brigantine Esmeralda, renamed Victoria, by pirates. Who knows who the pirates stole all this from? And it became clear almost immediately that the shipwrecked brigantine ended her days as a pirate ship. An excessive number of crew members, absolutely unnecessary for control, but very necessary during boarding. A lot of cold steel and firearms. A hook chamber full of gunpowder and kernels. Honest merchant navigators with a similar set do not go to sea. Transporting everything found to the camp on the shore and further to the galleons took several hours and required the use of almost all colonists as pack animals, and therefore lunch began much later than usual. But what a lunch it was! The boat sent to the fishery returned with a rich catch, so no one remembered about the disgusting corned beef either on that day or in the following ones. Fish soup, that is, fish soup for the first, fried fish for the second, tea. Also found in considerable quantities among the cargo of the lost brigantine, for the third, and all this with fragrant, freshly baked white bread. Grace. After lunch, almost the entire camp, with the exception of the watch, fell asleep. Moreover, Abraham van Weyden, who never particularly liked to sleep during the day, fell asleep so soundly that he woke up in the evening, and solely because Mordi woke him up. Uncle Abraham, get up! Senor de Torres will be showing the stars through a telescope. Are you going to watch? I'll go, of course. Thanks for waking me up. Abraham van Weyden got out from under the awning. The sun was already sinking into the ocean, coloring the western part of the horizon in crimson tones, and the eventful day smoothly flowed into the eventful night. A night under the stars with a telescope, when future residents of the colony of Israel, who have repeatedly listened to lectures by Miguel de Torres on the multiplicity of worlds, thanks to 4 huge telescopes, will be able to visually verify the correctness of his words. However, initially these 4 huge telescopes mounted on tripods, which also cost a lot of money, had a purely utilitarian purpose that was not directly related to science. They were supposed to be used as a means of long-range reconnaissance to detect the enemy approaching the settlement. But Miguel de Torres, who immediately set his eyes on them as soon as he learned that among the military equipment of the expedition there was such an optical miracle, as he put it, persuaded Isaac Stern to use these outstanding optical instruments in all respects, not only for the defense of future settlements of the colony of Israel, but also for science. And today, if I may say so, the pen test was supposed to take place. Moreover, the weather is favorable, there is not a cloud in the sky, and therefore after dinner everyone hurried to the coastal slope, where all 4 telescopes, called telescopes by Miguel de Torres in the scientific Greek manner, were already exposed. Twilight is short in low latitudes. The sun sank into the waves, and almost immediately a quiet tropical night descended over the island of Tristan da Cunha. The sky was shining, and nothing, not even a light haze, hid the brilliance of the constellations. The velvet black dome of the sky stretched from the zenith to the horizon, and among the many stars, like a faceted diamond, Venus shone, setting after the sun. Mercury was drowning in the waves of the ocean, ready to set. And on the opposite side, in the east, where the day is born, blood-red Mars, silvery yellowish Jupiter, and lead-grey Saturn shone with a steady, unblinking light. Abraham van Weyden was not impressed by Mercury and Venus. He had observed them before with a telescope, small crescents without any details. He expected more from a telescope with a diameter of 6 inches, although in fairness it had to be admitted that the clarity of the image given by the telescope was in no way comparable to the clarity of the image given by the telescope. Mars turned out to be much more interesting to observe. On the surface of the orange-reddish ball, light and dark spots were clearly distinguishable, the contours of which were very similar to terrestrial continents and seas. But the observations of Mars were nothing compared to those of Saturn and especially Jupiter. That's when the telescopes showed their full power. Yellow-orange Saturn appeared in all its glory, encircled by a sparkling double ring, and Jupiter in the form of a huge striped ball, near which, like polished silver coins, 4 satellites recently discovered by Galileo Galilei sparkled in the black void of the sky. Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto. Abraham van Weyden was shocked. No one, not even the best telescope, could show this. An amazing, enchanting sight. And there is no church and its inquisitors nearby who can forbid everything by sending disobedient heretics to the stake. They are far away in Europe, across thousands of miles of ocean, and here and now they cannot harm anyone. Then the telescopes were pointed at the Milky Way, and its nebulous band scattered into many stars, each of which, according to Giordano Bruno, was, albeit very distant, but also the Sun. Next, nebulae were observed, and they, as well as the Milky Way, scattered in the eyepieces of telescopes into many individual stars. After midnight, the half of the waning moon rose, and the swarm of stars faded in its faint silver glow, and then the telescopes showed their best side again. Lunar seas, or rather dark low-lying plains, at the bottom of which there is not a drop of water, mountain ranges and ring mountains, somewhat similar to gigantic circuses. A distant alien world appeared in all the smallest details before the eyes of enthusiastic observers. They went to bed well after midnight, but even lying down under the awning, Abraham van Weyden could not sleep for a long time, returning again and again to the memory of the starry mystery he had experienced that night. The next day was the last day of your stay on the island, although initially it was planned, if the weather permits, to stay on Tristan da Cunha for at least 4 or 5 days, devoting this time not only to rest, but also to full-fledged geographical research, including both mapping the coastline and mapping the interior. The islands are a walking research party. But, as the immutable folk wisdom says, if you want to make God laugh, tell him about your plans. No, the weather did not disappoint. The reason for the urgent departure was the completely unexpected eruption of the volcano, forming the island of Tristan da Cunha, which began in the afternoon. Although even in the morning, or rather, since after the night vigils no one woke up before lunch. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. Everything was going as usual. Breakfast, minor camp work. A stormy discussion of yesterday's astronomical observations with a passionate desire to repeat the very next night, weather permitting. Work resumed on the Lost Brigantine, where a group of sailors was sent to remove all the most valuable parts of the rigging and ship rigging that survived the shipwreck. And suddenly, the beginning of the eruption caught Abraham van Weyden on the coastal slope, where he explained the basics of mapping to the midshipmen in practice. It rumbled so hard that it filled my ears, and the next moment the ground under my feet shook noticeably, like the deck of a ship, adding horror to everything that was happening. Although in fact, despite the rumble and vibrations of the soil caused by the explosion of the crater floor, the volcano began to erupt. The beginning of the eruption did not pose any immediate danger to the colonists who landed on the island. but the wards of Abraham van Weyden, mostly natives of the free city of Hamburg and the surrounding lands, where neither volcanic eruptions nor even earthquakes have ever happened, were greatly impressed by what happened. Startled exclamations were heard, almost rising to a scream. "Ger van Weyden, what is this?" Abraham van Weyden looked up. Instead of a thin trickle of smoke, a huge blue-black mushroom cloud rose above the top of a volcano that had been smoking peacefully until recently. This, gentlemen midshipmen, is the beginning of a volcanic eruption. And calmly, there is no immediate danger. A volcano is not a barrel of gunpowder. It will not explode. We collect tools and go to the camp. The confident, commanding tone had an effect, nipping in the bud the nascent panic. Quickly, without fuss, we gathered and went to the shore. It took about 10 minutes to reach the camp, where preparations were already underway. "Is everything all right?" Isaac Stern met them with a question. "Yes, Mr. Stern, I'm fine, but the midshipmen were a little scared." Abraham van Weyden smiled. "But the general plan of the coast is ready, so we can assume that some of the mapping work has been completed. It's good, Herr van Weyden, that the midshipmen were a little scared." Isaac Stern also smiled. "You did the right thing. Those who are not afraid of anything do not live long. Everything is fine here too, except that the fallen awning scared some of the sleepers. But that's not the main thing. Senor de Torres advises to immediately remove the camp and leave. Your opinion, Herr van Weyden. You've seen volcanic eruptions, haven't you?" Twice, in the Caribbean and Iceland. Abraham van Weyden took another look at the top of the volcano. The mushroom cloud had already been blown away by the wind in the opposite direction from the location of the expedition camp, but the amount of smoke over the crater did not decrease. "I completely agree with Senor de Torres. The lava is unlikely to reach us. It is too far away, and it flows slowly. You can walk away, but besides lava, there are also mud flows from glaciers that have melted at the top. They may well reach the shore and flow very quickly. And even if the mud flow goes away, then ashes remain. And this cloud above the peak, judging by its shape and color, is ashen. Ash, of course, is not lava or mud. But it's also nothing good. The ships will have to be cleaned. So we're leaving immediately. It's a pity that I couldn't stay longer, but..." The roar of another explosion drowned out the last words of the head of the expedition. Another blue-black ash cloud rose above the top of the raging volcano. But there was no quick sailing. People and property were delivered to the ships in less than an hour. And then there were difficulties of a purely technical order. Because a galleon with its predominantly straight-sailing armament is not a schooner capable of going steeply to the wind under slanting sails, and even more so, not a rowing galley, for which the wind is generally unnecessary. For a galleon to move well, it needs wind aft, well, or at a certain, not very sharp angle, and this time the wind was, as if for evil, almost counter. That is why they moved away from the shore, slowly raising all the few slanting sails available, which allowed passengers and crew members who were not engaged in sailing work to admire the rapidly developing eruption from a fairly close, albeit safer, increasing distance. At first, the volcano threw out clouds of ash. Then, as Abraham van Weyden suggested, the glaciers, melted by volcanic heat encircling the top, until recently so dazzlingly sparkling in the rays of the sun, and now blackened by fallen ash, began to descend to the shore in stormy mud flows, one of which in a matter of minutes turned the location of the former expedition camp into a solid swamp. "We got out of there in time," Isaac Stern stated. "Otherwise everything would have sunk into the mud." "What's that?" He raised the telescope to his eyes. Suddenly, all of a sudden, a scarlet glow flashed at the place where there was a waterfall that provided the expedition with beautiful water, and in a matter of moments, instead of a boiling water stream, a jet of red-hot fiery liquid lava poured onto the mud-drenched shore. "Lava flows through the cracks," Miguel de Torres explained. "I saw this in Sicily during the eruption of Mount Etna. At first, the water from the glaciers was flowing, and now the lava is making its way through the cracks. It's going to pour out of the crater soon. And all this in a few hours. From a calm harbor to a fiery hell." Isaac Stern lowered his telescope. "Not the best place for a transshipment base." "Yes, it's not the best," Abraham van Weyden mentally agreed with the head of the expedition. "Although, on the other hand, people in Iceland have been living near active volcanoes for hundreds of years and nothing. So you'll need to come back here on the way back to see what and how. Maybe everything will not be so bad, and then we will finally decide whether to declare Tristan da Cunha an overseas territory of the colony of Israel, or abandon these plans forever, due to the too violent nature of the local nature. Finally, going out into the open ocean, they changed course from the north to the southeast. The wind became almost favorable, and therefore soon the island of Tristan da Cunha, engulfed in the flames of the eruption, remained far astern. Ahead was Kapstadt, the last stronghold of civilization, the last stop before the long and dangerous passage to Australia. Chapter 6. 6. Beware of strange mists. What is it anyway? On the one hand, the fog is like fog, dense, creeping along the very surface of the water, and on the other, Abraham van Weyden once again pointed his telescope at a strip of strange green fog, slowly spreading along the course of the galleons in the wake, covering the ships as if in a semicircle, more and more obscuring the sky and horizon. But the image, which was repeatedly approximated by optics, explained little. It's the same wall in the form of a dense greenish mass, no different in appearance if not for the strange green color from the typical fog of high latitudes. And all this has been going on for more than an hour, starting completely unexpectedly after noon bells, without any changes in the weather, which has remained warm and sunny since leaving Kapstadt, where they stood for almost a week waiting for a tailwind, replenishing supplies. And even the barometer shows nothing, although it should have, if only because the wind, which was still quite fresh in the morning, has now completely died down, which again indicates an imminent change in the weather. The first unusual phenomenon, a strange green cloud that appeared literally out of nowhere above the surface of the water, which is completely atypical for clouds, was noticed by a lookout sailor from the foretop, which he immediately reported, causing initially, for the most part, interest in the strange phenomenon rather than concern. A green cloud over the water at noon with an absolutely clear, cloudless sky. And what is it? But when, after a quarter of an hour, this strange cloud, in all respects from a harmless green cloud near the horizon, which, according to Miguel de Torres, could be nothing more than a dense swarm of flying insects, for example locusts, began to grow, turning into a wall of dense green fog before our eyes, there was no time for idle academic observations. Navigation in the fog, which hides every view, is dangerous in itself, threatening to collide or lose sight of other ships. And if this fog is green, and even occurs against all the rules prescribed by nature, then... But it did not work out to bypass the fog. The wind abruptly died down, and apparently in this part of the ocean, the undercurrent carried the ships that lost their course, as Captain Olaf Larsson aptly put it, right into the mouth of the fog. No, the color is clearly not due to the refraction of sunlight reflected from the surface of the water by fog. For a small cloud, this would still be acceptable, but for such sizes as now, glare would be observed at the edges, but there are none. So it's definitely not because of refraction. Miguel de Torres refuted his own previously expressed hypothesis about the reason for such a strange color of the fog. "Mordy," Abraham van Weyden called to his stepson, "run and check the barometer readings." "Yes, sir, Senior Navigator," smiling Mordy, proud that he was entrusted with the honor of being a messenger today, reporting changes in the readings of such an important ship's instrument as the barometer, left the quarterdeck, but returned less than a minute later and reported. "The readings are the same. There are no changes." They should be. The fog front, Abraham van Weyden estimated the distance, is no more than a mile away. "It's time to lower the sails, Herr Stern. I really don't like these identical barometer readings." Captain Olaf Larsson sounded clearly worried. "After all, I have never let you down before, and even if the wind blows right now, it's too late to bypass the fog." "The compass, Captain, the compass is weird." An exclamation from the helmsman at the helm cut the captain off in mid-sentence. All four of them at once, without speaking, rushed to the helm. After a couple of seconds, Morley joined them, who also became extremely interested in what was going on with the compass, the main navigation device on the ship. And something absolutely incredible was happening with the compass. The magnetic needle, which a few seconds ago had clearly indicated the position of the cardinal directions, was now randomly darting from side to side, sometimes making a full circle, as if ready to break off the axis. Yes, of course, ships' compasses were sometimes weird, and this fact has been known to sailors since the time of Columbus, who for the first time during his great voyage, noticed the deviation of the compass needle from the North Star, and it also happened that the compass needle suddenly, for no reason at all, began to tremble, deviating in different directions by several degrees, being unable to accurately indicate the position of the cardinal directions. But what was happening here and now? This does not seem to have been observed in the entire history of navigation, or worse, the sailors who observed this could no longer tell anyone about it. But anyway, there was a perfectly legitimate question, and even two. What should I do, and what should I do now? Go to Australia, guided by the sun and stars, or... And suddenly everything stopped. The arrow returned to its previous position, as if nothing had happened. Geir Larsson, tell the squadron. We lowered the sails. We lay down to drift. Isaac Stern finally broke the silence. In case of loss in the fog, the gathering place is Kapstadt. And also, he thought for a moment, request, how did the compasses behave on other ships? The answer was unexpected. Compasses pleased everyone, but in different ways. On the Moses, which was second in the order, the compass needle seemed to spin no weaker than on their flagship. Only deviations of a couple dozen degrees were observed on the David, and on the end, closing the marching order, Solomon. Only a slight tremor of the compass needle was observed, and if it had not been for the request, they might not have paid much attention to it at all. It's because of the fog, Miguel de Torres said in a peremptory tone. We and Moses were the closest, and David and Solomon. Won't this fog spoil our compasses? The helmsman interrupted the scientific reasoning of Miguel de Torres. It won't spoil it. We'll block it with a piece of iron. Geir Larsson, tell the squadron and more. Isaac Stern paused. Lock not only the working compasses, but also the spare ones. The devices are valuable. I would not like to lose them. And let's hope that everything will be fine. Yes, let's hope so. Abraham van Weyden mentally agreed with the head of the expedition, since they simply have no choice now. And the galleons, one by one, entered the fog.